So Luke 24 says Jesus came alive 3 days after he was killed. For some people, that is a problem. For some people can't believe it. Jesus coming alive could be a problem for you too, or for someone you know. And we're going to think about this problem and see what we can do about it. Because if Jesus coming alive is a problem to someone, you can help them. The part we read in Luke has 2 verses where someone heard that Jesus came alive and it was a problem for them. In verse 11, it says that they thought it was ridiculous, nonsense. And in verse 22, it says people got confused. 2 different things that happened, but basically they heard the same thing. 2 different responses that we just want to consider that we might come across. We might meet people who make one of these different responses. If people are going to make fun of us for saying Jesus came alive, or if they're going to get confused if we say this, it might be a problem for us, and it might be something we're scared of to the extent that we wouldn't say to somebody, Jesus came alive. We might think it's better to keep quiet about it. Now let's look at verse 11 first of all. Luke 24:11. These words that the women told to the apostles seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. The New International Version says, but they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. These women went to Jesus' grave and found it open and empty. And there were 2 men in shiny clothes there who said to them, Jesus has come alive. Verses 6 and 7. They said, he is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the 3rd day rise. So, if Jesus coming alive is a problem to someone, you can help them. If someone makes fun of it. What did they hear? They heard that Jesus had come alive. What did they do with that information? They went and told the apostles. What did the apostles think? They said, this sounds ridiculous. They said, it sounds like you're making it up. It's an idle tale, the ESV says. Nonsense, the NIV says. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded silly. And that's why people make fun of it. still, and even more. So what they heard was Jesus is alive. How it sounded to them, it sounded ridiculous. It sounded like nonsense. And I don't want people to think that I'm silly for saying that Jesus came alive. It is a problem. If it's a problem to that person, it can be a problem to me how I deal with that. Sometimes, though, when I just want to clarify this word nonsense in the NIV, because sometimes nonsense can be fun, and kids sometimes like nonsense rhymes, nonsense stories, stuff like that. Just got this book, Non-Stop Nonsense. I'd never heard of Margaret May before, but I like Quentin Blake, and he can do good nonsense pictures. I'll show you one in this book, and it's got a poem by the lady author. It's called My Sister. Here's Quentin Blake's drawing and the poem, My Sister. It mightn't be, you'll see it's nonsense because it couldn't apply to anyone's sister here. My sister's remarkably light. She can float to a fabulous height. It's a troublesome thing, but we tie her with string and we use her instead of a kite. So nonsense sometimes can be fun, and I think that was okay to call that nonsense because the poet was meant to be funny. But those women weren't trying to be funny. They were serious. Jesus' body was missing, and they were sad, scared, and very upset. This is a picture of Bishop Spong. I think he might have died recently, maybe last year, and shows the cover of his book, Resurrection, Myth or Reality. Bishop Spong says, in a fairly mysterious way, Peter had a vision and imagined that Jesus was alive. Imagined that Jesus was alive. And this book's been widely read, and a lot of church leaders believe that Bishop Spong is right. And I can imagine people in those churches would not dare to disagree because Bishop Spong, very well known, very respected, and they would look silly. Like those women. I don't know how they felt, really, but to the apostles they looked silly. But there was one thing that those apostles needed to do, something that everyone needs to do. And that is to go and check it out. Something everybody needs to do. When a person hears the story about Jesus coming alive, when it sounds foolish, What a person needs to do is to check it out. And so it's really good that Peter got up and went to the grave and looked inside, and that part of the women's story was true. Jesus' body wasn't there. That part wasn't nonsense. The women were right. It was empty. Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, no body. And he went home, marvelling at what had happened. That far. The women were right. But where was Jesus? Who moved the stone? This book helped me a lot when I first started wondering if I should believe this story. And I recommend the book a lot of times. Give it away. And Lucilla has got a copy that might go in the library very soon. So I think this is a great book for someone who thinks that it's a silly story, because the person who wrote it, actually, it's a bit of a interesting story, because it sounds like it's written by a lawyer. It's written as if it was a lawyer who's investigating Jesus' death and resurrection, where recently they've found out that it wasn't by a lawyer. But when this person looks into the story, he concludes that there would be no court that could not believe that this evidence was valid, that Jesus did rise. So it's very well told book, and I think it's great. If anyone is interested, to get it and check it out. So, what about someone who's confused about the story? In the next part of Luke 24, it talks about two other men who heard what the women said. Verses 22 and 23 tell us what they heard. It says, moreover, some women, this is the two men telling what happened. Some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. But these two don't call this nonsense or an idle tale. They weren't so rude as the other men at first, but they were confused. And maybe this is you or someone you know. Verse 22 says, some women of our company amazed us by what they were saying. The Holman Christian Study Bible says, astounded us. And King James Version says, they astonished us. What made them confused? What made them confused they say in verses 19 and 20. Jesus asks them, what things are they talking about? What's the problem? And they say, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. These people, expected Jesus to make Israel great straight away. And now he'd been killed and he'd been dead for 3 days. This is what confused them. This story that the women were telling, they actually say, has been driving us mad. I'm using that term because once before, Jesus' family thought he was mad, or people who knew him thought he was mad, partly because he did such great things, but because he gathered big crowds around, so many crowds that the people couldn't move. In Mark 3, verse 21, Jesus did great things, and the crowd gathered around so that the people in the house could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him. But they were saying he's out of his mind. Just, you can imagine, I never thought about it, never pictured it before. Just imagine family coming out. Get inside. You lost your mind, you're beside yourself. And that's the same thing that these men said the women did in their story to them. So now it's the opposite. Jesus had disappeared. No crowd. Jesus had disappeared. No redeeming Israel. What's going on? And these people even, it says, these people had the same problem. They were beside themselves. They were out of their minds. And now these men were out of their minds with all the confusion that the women were causing with their crazy story. Now, I don't think that being confused is as bad as making fun of Jesus coming alive. I think if someone's making fun of it, you feel you're being ridiculed as well. But if someone's confused, it's more encouraging, I think, to give an answer. But it does happen. People get confused when they hear the story. However, that shouldn't stop us from telling the story or from trying to clear up the confusion. If Jesus causes a problem, we shouldn't leave it at that because help is available. So, if someone's confused about it, about what they heard, and it sounded confusing, people couldn't get their head around it, what's going on, there's still an answer. Person can get help. Help is available. What sort of help? What's a person need to do? Well, Jesus told them what they need to do. They need to think about it. They need to think. We all need to think. If these amazing things are so difficult, which they are, that we get confused or make fun of it, we need to think clearly. When these men told Jesus what had happened, he said, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." Now, it sounds a bit harsh to call these disciples foolish, but actually you could just say unthinking people. You're not thinking straight. You need to get your minds working. You've closed off your minds in your confusion. You need to get your minds working and to believe what you heard. Think about what you've heard. Were the women making it up? No. They weren't. These men had to believe the things that they heard. And because Jesus goes on to explain that it's just like what the prophets have been saying. And just like Isaiah, when Isaiah says the Messiah is going to die, there was a point about that. He was going to die to take people's sins. When Isaiah says he's going to be exalted, he's going to be great, he's going to have a whole multitude of followers, Isaiah was right. This was true about Jesus. And so these people needed to understand what Isaiah was saying, think about what Isaiah was saying, and see how it applied to Jesus. Eventually, these men all thought about it and it made sense to them, and they realised that it was Jesus that was talking to them. It was true what they had heard. It wasn't nonsense, and it wasn't the women who confused them, but they confused themselves. They just needed to think about it and believe what they were being told. And it's really the same for everybody, for older people, for children, for bishops, for everybody. And we shouldn't get upset if there seems to be a problem about Jesus coming alive, because we can help. No matter who it is, we can help. There is help available. So just let's encourage each other not to check these things out to check these things out together, to not be scared to believe that Jesus did come alive. Or if someone you know has a problem with this, be calm and encourage them to check it out with you together. And if you believe that it's true that Jesus did come alive, this is the way you can help. We can tell the story. We can tell the story that the women told, like they did, even if it sounds weird or confusing. They didn't stop telling the story. Remember, it's not an idle tale. It's true. Believe it. Tell the story. This can help the other person and take away the problem. So let's just take a moment now, quietly, to think about it, and then I'll close in prayer. Lord, help us to believe what we have heard about Jesus coming alive. And help us to keep on believing it's true. even when other people make fun of it or just become confused. Help us so we can help them, and so the truth can spread and we can be faithful to the truth and faithful to Jesus. For his name's sake, amen.